Welcome back to Bedtime Historian 9 p.m., where calm history stories each night help you unwind and drift to sleep. Tonight, we're traveling with those who never stood still, people who packed their world onto the backs of animals and followed something as invisible as air itself. The topic? Why nomads always followed the wind. Picture yourself at twilight. The desert stretches before you like a sleeping ocean, waves of gold turning slowly to bronze. Tents shiver softly in the breeze. A herd murmurs in the distance, their bells chiming like drifting stars. You pull your cloak tighter, the air dry against your lips, and realize that out here, even silence moves. The wind isn't just background, it's direction, law, and warning. Ignore it, and you won't last the night. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The desert wind begins as a whisper, almost shy. It curls around your ankles, tracing the sand's cool skin, and you start walking toward nothing in particular. That's the secret of nomads. They rarely move toward something, they move with something. Long before maps, long before compasses, the air itself was their teacher. Every gust carried a message about rain, about prey, about a distant storm. Ignore it, and you won't last the night. The mainstream historians say the earliest nomads, hunter-gatherers, moved according to the seasons, chasing migrating herds. That's true, but it's incomplete. It wasn't just animals they followed, it was the wind patterns that signaled where the herds would go. Changes in prevailing winds often came before shifts in temperature or rainfall. One day, the breeze would feel wetter, softer. A few days later, the plains would bloom with grass and the herds would appear. Coincidence? Hardly. It was instinct honed by generations who learned that when the wind smells of green, you move. You kneel to feel the sand slide through your fingers. It's cool beneath the surface, smooth as sifted flour. You can almost hear it sigh. Some scientists say dunes themselves sing when wind passes over them, low humming tones produced by billions of grains vibrating in harmony. Bedouins once believed these songs were the voices of jinn guiding travelers. Modern physicists call it resonance. Between those two explanations lies the human truth. We give mystery a name so we can live beside it. Now, imagine spending your entire life chasing that music. Every morning, the landscape rearranges itself. Trails vanish overnight. Yesterday's dune becomes tomorrow's pit. You learn quickly that permanence is a myth. Even the horizon isn't fixed. To survive, you don't memorize landmarks, you memorize behaviors. How smoke bends at dawn, how the wind shifts at sunset, how your horse flicks its ear before a storm. There's a joke among old nomads, told half seriously, that the wind is the only one who knows where we're going. They'd laugh as they loaded their camels, and someone would add, "And he won't tell us until we get there." Humor, after all, is the best insulation against the absurd. Historians still argue whether these migrations were purely practical or deeply spiritual. Was the wind simply a weather cue or a divine messenger? In ancient Turkic tales, the sky god Tengri breathed life into humans with the same air that moves the steppes. In North Africa, the sirocco was seen as both curse and blessing, destroying crops one season, bringing rain the next. When everything you depend on arrives invisibly, it's natural to think of it as alive. You walk further, your shadow lengthening beside you. The camp behind you fades, but the wind remains steady, cool against your skin. It feels like a conversation, one you don't quite understand, but trust anyway. The desert isn't empty, it's in motion. Every grain, every scent, every whisper is data. Nomads learn to read it the way modern people read phone screens. Somewhere far off, a desert fox darts between rocks, vanishing like smoke. It knows the air will change soon. You can sense it too, a faint tension, like the desert holding its breath. The wind will turn, and when it does, the entire camp will move with it. Tents folded, fires buried, footprints erased. Tomorrow, there'll be no sign you were ever here. And somehow, that's comforting, because to follow the wind is to surrender to the idea that nothing truly belongs to you. Not the land, not the sky, not even the path. You belong to the moment, and the moment moves.
The stars have risen now, pricked across the black like frost on glass. You lie awake, wrapped in a wool cloak that smells faintly of smoke and sweat, and listen to the sound of the wind nudging your tent's canvas. It feels like it's trying to talk to you, though it never says words, just breathes, sighs, rearranges silence. Out here, it's the oldest language in the world, and you're beginning to understand it. Long before there were cities, before bricks and fences and the hum of static lights, there were only two things humans trusted: fire and wind. One gave warmth, the other told them where warmth could be found. Anthropologists tracing early migrations note that prehistoric peoples didn't wander aimlessly. They followed prevailing winds that hinted at the presence of water or vegetation. A crosswind might carry the sweet smell of wet soil, the faint musk of animals, or the rot of distant marshland. Each scent meant something different, and in a landscape with no signposts, that was enough. The wind was the breath of the earth itself. In countless myths, from Africa to the Arctic, creation began not with thunder or flame, but with air moving across stillness. The Egyptians believed Shu, god of air, held apart the sky and earth so life could breathe between them. The Navajo told of the holy people breathing wind into corn pollen to make the first humans. In the Bible, the word ruach, spirit, literally means wind. Every culture, every continent felt some version of that same truth. Life begins when air moves. You shift your gaze upward. The stars tremble through a layer of moving haze. The air feels different tonight, cooler, thinner, sharper. You might not name it, but your body notices. Your skin is a sensor, your breath a compass. You realize that following the wind wasn't superstition, it was science disguised as faith. The ancients were amateur meteorologists long before the word existed. They watched which way grass leaned, how smoke coiled, how clouds feathered across the sky. They read the air's temperature, its taste, its weight. A sudden gust before dawn might mean rain by noon. A warm, heavy stillness could signal locusts or dust storms. These weren't omens, they were forecasts. Sure, no one wore white lab coats or carried instruments, but if your entire survival depended on invisible currents, you'd learn to read them too. Still, not every wind was kind. Some carried disease or despair. When the Khamseen swept through Egypt, hot, dry, filled with dust, it turned temper short and livestock restless. The Greeks called such moods animomania, wind madness. Even Hippocrates wrote about how certain winds affected human health and humor. And though modern doctors may smile at that, there's evidence that strong, dry winds really can mess with serotonin levels. So maybe the ancients weren't so wrong after all. You imagine standing in that ancient camp, the night alive with stories told between gusts. An elder would point to the sky, voice low and steady, explaining how every wind had a name. The north wind that brought cold and wolves, the south that carried rain, the east that whispered of travelers, the west that warned of death. Children would grow up knowing those names the way you know street names now. There's something oddly comforting in that. A world where orientation isn't digital but elemental. You don't check a screen to see which way to go. You lift your face and feel. The air tells you everything you need to know. A funny thing, modern scientists once tried to replicate what those early wanderers did by instinct. In the 1970s, a team studied wind patterns to see if they matched prehistoric migration routes. To their surprise, they did. The same currents that shaped weather also shaped human destiny. Like grains of pollen, people moved where the air carried them. Historians still argue whether it was purely coincidence, but you can't help smiling at the idea that every step humanity took, from Africa to Asia, from tundra to plain, was orchestrated by something as light as a breeze. You close your eyes and let the tent walls pulse in rhythm with the air. Outside, the wind hums softly over dunes that shift like sleeping giants. You can almost feel the deep patience of the land, knowing it will outlast every footprint, every fleeting campfire. And yet, within that vast indifference, the wind keeps carrying the same story. Move or be buried. Perhaps that's why nomads never stopped. The earth itself was breathing, and to stay still was to hold your breath too long.
By dawn, the world has been erased again. The tracks your camels made yesterday are gone, brushed clean by the night wind as if you'd never existed. The horizon is smooth and soft, just ripples of pale gold beneath a silver sky. You stir from your blanket, half disoriented, half awed. Out here, the landscape forgets quickly. If you fall behind, even the sand will deny you were ever part of it. Nomads learn that lesson early. The desert keeps no memory, but the wind does. You stand, stretch, and feel it graze your cheek, dry, insistent, almost personal. It seems to point in a direction you can't quite define. There are no road signs, no fences, no cities glittering in the distance. Yet every experienced wanderer knows that air itself has direction, and that's what you follow. Historians say this was one of the most remarkable psychological adaptations in human evolution, learning to trust what you can't see. The oldest caravan routes weren't drawn from maps, but from memory, rhythm, and the way wind shifted the dunes. Over generations, families taught their children how to sense the patterns. When the east wind came soft and constant, it meant the dry season was nearing its end. When it turned cool and from the north, rains would soon chase them. The Bedouins even had a saying, "The wind is the shepherd of the sand." They believed dunes were like flocks, always moving under their master's breath. By observing their motion, you could predict tomorrow's shape of the world. You pick up a handful of sand and let it pour through your fingers. The grains swirl, caught briefly in the sunlight before scattering. It's hypnotic, the same dance that's been happening for millennia. Archaeologists once found fossilized dunes in Namibia that still bore traces of ancient ripple marks identical to the ones forming today. The pattern never changes, only the place does. A light joke drifts through your head. One an old Turag guide once told travelers, "The desert writes its diary in sand, but every morning it forgets to save." You grin at the thought. It's humor born of humility, because when everything resets daily, arrogance becomes impractical. For a nomad, following the wind wasn't poetic, it was survival math. Roads were illusions. Try to build one, and the dunes would eat it within a week. The only constant was movement. The wind wasn't just a guide, it was the only archive worth reading. There's an eerie kind of intimacy in how closely people studied it. A shift of temperature by 1 degree, a subtle dryness on the tongue, the faint sound of sand grains clicking like rain on canvas. All these were clues. You think of it as sensory overload. They thought of it as literacy. Their eyes read the ground, their ears read the air, and their hearts read timing. Yet even they sometimes got it wrong. Historians still argue over how entire caravans disappeared not because of lack of direction, but because they followed a deceptive wind. In some cases, a sandstorm would suddenly reverse, leading travelers in circles until exhaustion overtook them. Others claimed the desert lied, that an evil wind called Afrit deliberately misled the proud. You step outside the camp. The sun is climbing now and the dunes begin to shimmer. Heat bends the horizon into liquid. Your throat dries quickly, the wind stealing moisture faster than you can drink. You can almost hear the whispering echo of ancient travelers muttering prayers into the breeze, not for miracles, just for balance. There's something strangely modern about it all. Even today, people lose themselves when they forget to adapt, when they expect the ground to stay the same beneath them. The nomads had no such delusions. Every day was a reset button. Their footprints vanished, but their awareness didn't. They carried their coordinates in muscle memory and intuition. And perhaps that's what made them so enduring.
Civilizations with walls crumbled when rivers changed course or storms grew stronger. But nomads, they simply turned their faces toward the new wind and kept walking. It's humbling to think about. Permanence, the thing humans crave most, might actually be the opposite of survival. As you stand there, the air hums again, tugging at your scarf. You realize that to follow the wind, you must accept a world without anchors. You must move when it moves. You smile to yourself, because it's the same lesson modern life keeps teaching in subtler ways. Emails vanish, algorithms shift, trends dissolve overnight. Maybe the old desert wanderers would laugh at how shocked people are when the landscape changes. For them, impermanence wasn't a glitch. It was the only rule that ever stayed the same.
By midday, the desert has lost its gentle glow and turned to glare. The sand burns like powdered glass, and the sky feels close enough to press against your skin. You narrow your eyes, scanning for any sign of direction, but there's nothing, just shimmering waves of heat. If someone dropped you here blindfolded, you'd swear you were inside an oven made of light. And yet, for countless centuries, nomads crossed this very kind of nothingness with uncanny precision. You kneel, scoop a little dust into your palm, and watch it lift and scatter. That's when you realize something subtle. The air doesn't just blow, it reveals. Every swirl of grit sketches an invisible map. To people who learned how to look, that map was as clear as ink on parchment. Nomads called this art reading the air. They could tell the shape of unseen terrain from the way wind carried particles. A thin, high hiss meant smooth dunes ahead. A low, rumbling drift meant rocks. If the wind carried the faint metallic taste of iron, there were likely mountains somewhere upwind. Modern geologists confirmed this strange accuracy. Air truly picks up minerals that signal what's far beyond the horizon. You just have to know what your tongue is tasting. That's how they survived, by trusting senses city dwellers have long forgotten. As you walk, the air changes again. It grows heavier, swirling in small vortices at your feet. You spot faint eddies of dust spiraling upward, tiny whirlwinds called jinn dances by Bedouins. They believed each swirl marked a spirit's passing. Whether that's true or not, they served another purpose: miniature forecasts. These little dust devils form where heat and cool air collide, often a sign that stronger winds or storms are brewing to the east. There's a certain poetry in that, ghosts and meteorology existing in the same phenomenon. Ancient wanderers didn't need to separate the sacred from the scientific. The desert didn't care about categories, and neither did they. Your camel shifts nervously. Animals, too, read the air. Their ears flick toward sound frequencies too subtle for human perception. Their nostrils widen to catch moisture or the musk of far-off herds. I remember something I read once. When the Mongolian steppe horses sense a sudden change in wind direction, they instinctively face it. No one taught them that. It's simply life-saving habit encoded in bone. Humans, it seems, borrowed from that instinct, turning it into a culture. That's why wind became more than movement. It became memory. Nomads noticed that every gust carried traces of where it had been.
The sweetness of distant valleys, the salt of evaporated lakes, the faint rot of overripe grass. It wasn't superstition to smell the world, it was evidence. And over centuries, those observations turned into navigation. In Arabia, shepherds followed the cool winds that came before the rains. In Mongolia, riders looked for warm, dry gusts to signal spring thaw. In North Africa, whole tribes timed their migrations to the seasonal return of the harmattan, that dusty traveler from the Sahara. Historians still debate how much of this was conscious strategy versus generational instinct. Some say nomads learned through trial and error. Those who misread the wind didn't live long enough to teach others. Others argue it was ritualized knowledge, taught through songs, stories, and metaphors that encoded meteorology in myth. Maybe both are true. After all, songs last longer than instruction manuals. And there were songs, low, rhythmic chants that matched the cadence of walking feet and shifting dunes. Some tribes sang to the wind itself, asking it to stay kind or lead softly. You'd think that was just ceremony, but modern studies show rhythmic chanting can steady breathing and help regulate heart rate. It turns out speaking with the wind wasn't only spiritual, it was physiologically smart. You pause for water, but the skin is nearly empty. The wind steals droplets from your lips before you can swallow. It's humbling, this invisible force taking what it wants, giving nothing back unless you understand how to ask. And yet, for all its cruelty, nomads found harmony with it. They built their tents with open flaps angled toward prevailing currents, allowing air to cool the interiors. They burned fires low and wide so the smoke would hug the ground, not betray their position. They wore loose, layered robes, not just for modesty or protection from heat, but to let the wind circulate under the cloth, a portable air conditioning system perfected thousands of years before electricity. You chuckle softly, imagining ancient designers pitching the concept. Our newest innovation? Clothing that actually uses the desert. It sounds modern, but it's just clever humility. Because when you can't dominate nature, you learn to collaborate with it. The desert is full of those collaborations. You walk past dunes that curve like frozen waves, each shaped precisely by the angle of prevailing wind. If you know the geometry, you can tell direction at a glance. A windward slope is gentle, a leeward one steep. Bedouins once taught their children to sleep on the steeper side. It offered better shelter from sand drift. Even in their rest, they were reading the air. As the sun lowers again, long shadows return. You stop and look back. Once more, your footprints are nearly gone. The sand is erasing your passage with quiet efficiency. It's strange. You feel no loss. You almost find comfort in it. There's something deeply peaceful about being unrecorded, unburdened by trace. In a world obsessed with permanence, the nomad's wisdom feels radical. If the wind can't find you tomorrow, neither can regret.
The next morning begins not with sunrise, but with sound, the restless shuffle of hooves and the soft grunt of animals testing the air. You wake to find the herd already stirring, heads turned toward the horizon where the wind is coming from. They seem to know something before anyone else does. That's the first rule of life on the move. When in doubt, ask the animals. For nomads, beasts weren't tools, they were teachers. Sheep, camels, horses all had a better instinct for the invisible. They could sense a shift in pressure, in moisture, in mood. A camel, for instance, can smell water nearly 3 kilometers away. Horses react to electrical changes in the air hours before storms. Even birds, riding invisible thermals, hint at how the sky itself is changing. To survive, you learn to watch them, not command them. You glance toward a cluster of goats, their coats rippling in the gust. They huddle instinctively, facing downwind. That means something. Dry heat is coming. Maybe 2 days of stillness, followed by a storm. You might not have a barometer, but you have fur and feathers and instincts all around you. Biological weather stations scattered across the dunes. Early herders knew this better than anyone. They'd decide where to move next, not by drawing lots or reading stars, but by observing the herd's behavior. When animals grew restless, humans packed. When they relaxed and grazed deeply, you stayed. This quiet consultation between species was the core of nomadic science, an ancient form of crowdsourced forecasting. One old Mongolian proverb says, "The horse smells the future through its nostrils." It sounds like poetry, but it's as practical as advice gets. Scientists later discovered that equines really do detect tiny drops in air pressure, something that warns of incoming storms or changing seasons. And in the Arctic tundra, reindeer herders still rely on how their animals face the wind to decide daily movement. When reindeer turn east, snow is expected. When west, clear skies. You think of them as rustic weather apps, except they don't crash, don't need batteries, and have 4 legs. You stretch your legs and walk among the herd, feeling the ground vibrate faintly under each hoof. The animals aren't just listening, they feel the earth breathe. Some scientists believe the combined pressure of migrating herds even influences microclimates, stirring up dust that in turn affects wind formation. So in a sense, the animals and air are in dialogue, a dance so subtle humans can only observe it from the edge. Historians still debate whether early pastoral nomadism began because of environmental change or because humans learned to mimic animal migration. Whichever came first, both shared one truth. When the wind turned, everything moved. Stay behind, and the grass dried, the water vanished, and the predators arrived. Move, and life began again somewhere else. It's humbling how much of civilization's earliest mobility depended on watching a cow's tail or a camel's posture. Yet that's precisely what gave humanity endurance. While empires fought over borders and crops, the wanderers just followed the rhythm of breath and hoofbeats. You reach for your water skin and take a sip, watching the herd press forward in a line that seems to form of its own accord. The dust rises in soft ribbons, carried perfectly by the breeze. It's oddly elegant, the kind of accidental choreography only nature can stage. You remember reading that Bedouin tribes often gave the wind nicknames based on how it treated their animals. A calm, cool gust that let camels rest was called the shepherd's friend. A hot one that drove them to madness was called the whip. Those weren't just metaphors, they were field reports. Every gust had its consequence, and each was logged in oral tradition. There's something almost technological if you think in the language of today. Data, patterns, predictive modeling, all done without paper, just observation and storytelling. You can imagine elders sitting by firelight, recounting which direction the wind blew before the last drought or plague of locusts. Their memories were libraries, their lives experiments repeated across generations. And maybe that's why following the wind was never seen as aimless drifting. It was research, slow, patient, generational research. Still, not every herd was cooperative. Sometimes animals rebelled, panicked at nothing visible. Old legends said that meant the ghost wind was near, air so heavy with spirits that it disturbed even beasts. But modern understanding offers another theory: pressure systems. Before a massive weather change, air grows thick, laden with ions that animals can sense, but humans cannot. A few hours later, the storm arrives. Whether ghost or science, the effect is the same. You'd better be ready to move. As evening falls, the camp forms again. The herd settles, tethered loosely, bells chiming faintly in rhythm with the breeze. You sit beside the fire, warming your hands against its glow. The wind blows sideways through the flames, bending them into liquid ribbons. It's oddly elegant, the kind of accidental choreography only nature can stage. You remember reading that Bedouin tribes often gave the wind nicknames based on how it treated their animals. A calm, cool gust that let camels rest was called the shepherd's friend. A hot one that drove them to madness was called the whip. Maybe that's the real secret. Survival isn't about resisting the wind, or even following it blindly. It's about understanding the relationship. You and the wind don't battle, you negotiate. You lean back, eyes half closed, listening to the low murmur of the herd breathing in the dark. You wonder how many thousands of nights like this humanity has lived, guided not by maps or gods, but by the same invisible whisper brushing past your cheek right now. By dawn, the camp is already half gone. Tents collapse into tidy bundles, cooking stones are buried, and the fire pit is erased beneath a light scuff of sand. Only the smoke lingers, thin, white, and wandering. You watch it twist, rise, and drift sideways until it becomes a ghostly ribbon across the morning light. The wind catches it and carries it toward the east, as if pointing the way. That's when it hits you. The wind didn't just decide where you went. It decided where your fire could live. In the nomadic world, a flame was more than heat. It was identity, the living heart of every camp. And yet, it could only exist where the air allowed it. Too little breeze and smoke suffocated the lungs of those huddled nearby. Too much, and the whole camp went up in minutes. Survival depended on mastering that delicate dialogue between fire and wind, a conversation that's been going on since the first spark met the first gust. Imagine it, an ancestor crouched in some forgotten plain, cupping hands around a trembling ember. The fire wants to rise, the wind wants to run. Somehow he convinces them to cooperate. That negotiation, repeated thousands of times, became the rhythm of migration itself. Nomads learned early that a portable fire wasn't a luxury, it was a miracle of physics. They built shallow pits
lined with damp sand to anchor the embers. They fed flames with dried dung instead of wood. It burned slow, steady, less smoke, and it was already part of their ecosystem. The trick wasn't to dominate the wind, but to recruit it. Just enough airflow to keep the coals glowing as they packed, walked, unpacked, and lit again. Historians note that this method of portable hearths, tiny fire pits carried from camp to camp, is among the oldest surviving technologies of human migration. Archaeological digs in Central Asia found traces of hearth ash layered in mobile patterns, suggesting families carried fire with them like a pet. Not symbolic, literal. Fire that had warmed their grandparents still burned, gently breathing through goatskin pouches in clay jars. You imagine that, passing down not just tools or songs, but a living flame, a single ember traveling across centuries. It's hard not to romanticize that, but it was practical too. Fire kindled faster if it had an ancestor. That continuity of warmth meant life could resume instantly wherever the wind set them down. Some tribes even gave their fires names. There are accounts from the Kazakh steppe of clans who believed the wind itself watched over those flames, testing their discipline. If the fire blew out before they were ready to move, it was considered a sign they'd lingered too long in one place. There's an odd humor in that, the wind as a personal coach, shouting, "Time to go!" with a gust through the tent flap. And yet, they listened. Even the architecture of nomadic life was built to breathe. Every yurt, every tent, every lean-to followed one fundamental law: let the air move. Too still, and you'd suffocate from heat and smoke. Too open, and you'd lose warmth. That balance between inhale and exhale was the same principle the body uses to stay alive. You step inside one of those tents in your mind. The interior is dim, cool, almost sacred. The smoke hole above doubles as a compass. Its orientation reveals the direction of the wind each morning. If the flap flutters westward, travelers might stay put. Eastward, they pack. It's simple, elegant, and works as long as the wind does, which, of course, is always. Modern architects studying Bedouin tents discovered something astonishing. Their structure naturally regulates airflow, creating interior temperatures up to 10 degrees Celsius cooler than outside, a feat of physics wrapped in goat hair. No fans, no vents, just centuries of observation and trust. The more you think about it, the more it feels like wind was the invisible architect of civilization's first mobile homes. And if you squint at the glowing smoke, you start to see another truth. The wind wasn't only a guide or a builder, it was memory again. Every gust carried scent, and scent carried history. Smoke from a fire could be smelled miles away, signaling friends, kin, or danger. Some tribes even used different fuels, juniper, palm, dung, or driftwood, so that allies could identify them by smell alone. In a world without text messages, this was airmail in the truest sense. You smile, half amused, half humbled. Even back then, humans were broadcasting status updates, just with campfire smoke instead of Wi-Fi. Still alive, heading north, bring dates. Scholars still debate
whether nomads consciously developed this smoke communication or if it evolved naturally through repetition. But one thing's certain, the air between camps wasn't empty. It was alive with messages, smells, and signs only those attuned to the wind could interpret. And maybe that's why every fire, every puff of smoke, every shift in breeze carried emotional weight. It wasn't just weather, it was contact, a kind of cosmic companionship in an otherwise silent world. As dusk returns, you sit again beside your own small fire, its smoke curling gently into the violet sky. The wind brushes past, playfully rearranging the flames. It's mischievous, yes, but it's also kind. You realize that for all its unpredictability, the wind is the only constant partner nomads ever had. You lie back, listening to the soft crackle, watching embers glow like distant constellations. Somewhere beyond the dunes, another traveler is probably staring at their own fire, feeling the same breeze. And in that shared breath of air, you're both home. By dawn, the camp is already half gone. Tents collapse into tidy bundles, cooking stones are buried, and the fire pit is erased beneath a light scuff of sand. Only the smoke lingers, thin, white, and wandering. You watch it twist, rise, and drift sideways until it becomes a ghostly ribbon across the morning light. The wind catches it and carries it toward the east, as if pointing the way. That's when it hits you. The wind didn't just decide where you went. It decided where your fire could live. In the nomadic world, a flame was more than heat. It was identity, the living heart of every camp. And yet, it could only exist where the air allowed it. Too little breeze and smoke suffocated the lungs of those huddled nearby. Too much, and the whole camp went up in minutes. Survival depended on mastering that delicate dialogue between fire and wind, a conversation that's been going on since the first spark met the first gust. Imagine it, an ancestor crouched in some forgotten plain, cupping hands around a trembling ember. The fire wants to rise, the wind wants to run. Somehow he convinces them to cooperate. That negotiation, repeated thousands of times, became the rhythm of migration itself. Nomads learned early that a portable fire wasn't a luxury, it was a miracle of physics. They built shallow pits lined with damp sand to anchor the embers. They fed flames with dried dung instead of wood. It burned slow, steady, less smoke, and it was already part of their ecosystem. The trick wasn't to dominate the wind, but to recruit it. Just enough airflow to keep the coals glowing as they packed, walked, unpacked, and lit again. Historians note that this method of portable hearths, tiny fire pits carried from camp to camp, is among the oldest surviving technologies of human migration. Archaeological digs in Central Asia found traces of hearth ash layered in mobile patterns, suggesting families carried fire with them like a pet. Not symbolic, literal. Fire that had warmed their grandparents still burned, gently breathing through goatskin pouches in clay jars. You imagine that, passing down not just tools or songs, but a living flame, a single ember traveling across centuries. It's hard not to romanticize that, but it was practical too. Fire kindled faster if it had an ancestor. That continuity of warmth meant life could resume instantly wherever the wind set them down. Some tribes even gave their fires names. There are accounts from the Kazakh steppe of clans who believed the wind itself watched over those flames, testing their discipline. If the fire blew out before they were ready to move, it was considered a sign they'd lingered too long in one place. There's an odd humor in that, the wind as a personal coach, shouting, "Time to go!" with a gust through the tent flap. And yet, they listened. Even the architecture of nomadic life was built to breathe. Every yurt, every tent, every lean-to followed one fundamental law: let the air move. Too still, and you'd suffocate from heat and smoke. Too open, and you'd lose warmth. That balance between inhale and exhale was the same principle the body uses to stay alive. You step inside one of those tents in your mind. The interior is dim, cool, almost sacred. The smoke hole above doubles as a compass. Its orientation reveals the direction of the wind each morning. If the flap flutters westward, travelers might stay put. Eastward, they pack. It's simple, elegant, and works as long as the wind does, which, of course, is always. Modern architects studying Bedouin tents discovered something astonishing. Their structure naturally regulates airflow, creating interior temperatures up to 10 degrees Celsius cooler than outside, a feat of physics wrapped in goat hair. No fans, no vents, just centuries of observation and trust. The more you think about it, the more it feels like wind was the invisible architect of civilization's first mobile homes. And if you squint at the glowing smoke, you start to see another truth. The wind wasn't only a guide or a builder, it was memory again. Every gust carried scent, and scent carried history. Smoke from a fire could be smelled miles away, signaling friends, kin, or danger. Some tribes even used different fuels, juniper, palm, dung, or driftwood, so that allies could identify them by smell alone. In a world without text messages, this was airmail in the truest sense. You smile, half amused, half humbled. Even back then, humans were broadcasting status updates, just with campfire smoke instead of Wi-Fi. Still alive, heading north, bring dates. Scholars still debate whether nomads consciously developed this smoke communication or if it evolved naturally through repetition. But one thing's certain: the air between camps wasn't empty. It was alive with messages, smells, and signs only those attuned to the wind could interpret. And maybe that's why every fire, every puff of smoke, every shift in breeze carried emotional weight. It wasn't just weather, it was contact, a kind of cosmic companionship in an otherwise silent world. As dusk returns, you sit again beside your own small fire, its smoke curling gently into the violet sky. The wind brushes past, playfully rearranging the flames. It's mischievous, yes, but it's also kind. You realize that for all its unpredictability, the wind is the only constant partner nomads ever had. You lie back, listening to the soft crackle, watching embers glow like distant constellations. Somewhere beyond the dunes, another traveler is probably staring at their own fire,
feeling the same breeze. And in that shared breath of air, you're both home.
The next morning feels alive before the sun even climbs. The air hums faintly, like a stretched drum. You sense it the way you sense someone watching you. The wind gathering itself, testing the direction it wants to go. The camp, half awake, begins to read its intentions. Everyone looks upward, not at the stars now, but at the clouds. Nomads are sky readers, always have been. You tilt your head and see thin silver streaks cutting across the blue. Cirrus clouds, long and high. Beautiful, yes, but also meaningful. They form when warm, moist air meets cold, dry layers far above, and that means a change is coming. To you, it's just weather. To the wanderer, it's tomorrow's destination. Across the ages, this was the truest calendar, not months or moons, but motion. The way a cloud bends, the color of the dawn haze, the slant of dust in sunlight. These were the signs that told them when to rest, when to move, when to gather, when to scatter. You breathe in deeply. The air smells faintly metallic, a sure sign that humidity is climbing. Somewhere to the south, a storm is waking. Historians believe the earliest meteorological knowledge wasn't written, but performed, shared through stories, songs, and gestures. Among Mongol herders, elders would spread their fingers to mimic cloud shapes as they sang, teaching the young to read the sky's handwriting. Tuareg tribes of the Sahara still use phrases like, "The cloud has turned its shoulder," meaning the wind will change by dusk. It's scientific shorthand disguised as poetry. And it works. Nomads noticed that even the most delicate shift in upper air could foreshadow vast changes below. A lazy swirl of dust might precede a gale. A haze on the horizon meant an oasis, moisture reflecting the heat. A halo around the moon meant rain. None of this was superstition. It was centuries of patient watching, coded into memory the way modern pilots memorize instruments. You picture one of those travelers, wrapped in cloth, eyes narrowed against the glare, standing on a dune, scanning the heavens. There's no GPS, no compass, no forecast, just silence and sky. But that's all they need. Funny thing though, even with all this precision, they often spoke of the wind as if it had moods. The wind is sleeping. The wind is angry. The wind remembers. To outsiders, it sounds naive. But try spending your whole life depending on something invisible, and you might start assigning it emotions too. When it saves your life one day and tries to bury you the next, you can't help but treat it like an unpredictable companion. And here's the curious part. Ancient scholars actually built systems around those moods. In China's Zhou dynasty, philosophers described the Ba Feng, 8 winds, each with its personality, benevolent, cruel, dry, wet, strong, weak, faithful, or fickle. Arab astronomers later mapped similar wind houses across the compass rose, each linked to a season and a deity. It was the first blend of meteorology and mythology, and it shaped how travelers made decisions. You smirk softly at the irony. Even when people believed in divine breath, they were doing data analytics. Historians still argue whether these sky-reading traditions came from shared human observation or cultural exchange along trade routes. Perhaps both. Knowledge travels the same way as air. No borders, just pressure moving from high to low. You kneel down and draw a line in the sand with your finger, mimicking the shape of a cloud bank. The sand grains dance lightly over it, filling the groove. That's the thing about reading the sky. It only lasts a moment. The pattern you see now won't exist an hour later. So you learn to remember motion, not image. There's a certain peace in that impermanence. In a world where modern people panic over forecasts being off by 2 degrees, nomads simply accepted the weather as a conversation, not a command. If the wind turned east, so did they. If the rain came early, they welcomed it. If lightning struck too close, they took it as a reminder that they were guests here. You squint toward the horizon now. The cirrus trails have thickened into faint white curls, their edges glowing. Soon they'll become altostratus, then maybe rain. But for now, the air is tender and electric. You can almost taste the storm before it's born. And just as you think that, the wind shifts. It brushes your face from a new direction, cooler, carrying the scent of wet dust. The animals stir. Someone starts singing softly, a tune half warning, half lullaby. You don't understand the words, but you catch the rhythm. Slow, circular, like air, looping endlessly over the earth. That song, too, is a kind of map. Because when all else fails, when stars hide, dunes shift, and smoke fades, the wind is still there, whispering through the clouds, it wrote itself. You stand a little straighter, eyes closed, letting it touch your face. And you understand now why nomads never felt lost. The air was never empty. It was their teacher, their oracle, their oldest friend.
By the time the storm passes, the desert looks entirely new. The dunes have shifted, hills where valleys once were, ridges curling like waves in a petrified sea. It's as if the earth has exhaled in slow motion and rearranged its bones. You climb to the top of one of these new ridges, breathing hard, and pause to look around. There's no trace of yesterday, no footprints, no fire pits, not even the outline of the camp. But the dunes themselves are talking. Every curve, every ripple is shaped by the direction and strength of the wind. For nomads, that was more than beauty. It was geography. The sand itself became a map that only they could read. You crouch and trail your fingers through the surface. The slope facing the wind, the stoss side, is long and smooth, while the lee side falls sharply away. The sharper side always points downwind. It's basic geomorphology, something modern geologists explain with equations about shear stress and particle velocity. But thousands of years ago, barefoot wanderers already knew the formula in their bones. They called it the desert's secret compass. You imagine a traveler kneeling just as you are now, studying the angle of a dune's crest. He doesn't need a compass needle. he feels direction through the skin of the world. A steeper face to the west means the prevailing wind is from the east. Simple, silent, precise. Historians sometimes underestimate how advanced this was. The ability to navigate featureless landscapes required pattern recognition that bordered on the artistic. Some researchers even compare nomadic pathfinding to jazz improvisation, fluid, intuitive, based on rhythm rather than rigid notes. The dunes were the sheet music, the wind, the melody. And if you think about it, it's true. Every grain of sand was a note, and every gust rearranged the song. You take another step and notice how the wind carves tiny ripples near your feet, perfectly parallel lines spaced just a few centimeters apart. Scientists call them wind ripple marks. Nomads called them the writing of the sky. Those ripples all run perpendicular to the wind's direction, meaning if you can read them, you can orient yourself even under a blank horizon. There's humor in that too. Somewhere, an ancestor probably squinted at those same ripples and grumbled, "Great, the wind left me a note again. Too bad it's in cursive." But jokes aside, this literacy of landscape saved lives. In places where compasses spun uselessly from magnetite-rich rocks and where the stars were hidden by dust, the dunes offered reliable guidance. Archaeologists working in the Empty Quarter, a vast desert between Saudi Arabia, Oman, and the UAE, found that ancient caravan paths run along corridors that perfectly match long-term dune orientation. The wind, in essence, drew highways across the sand. And nomads? They simply followed the blueprints nature drafted for them. Still, not everyone could read the message correctly. Some dunes, called barkans, curve like horns that point in the direction of wind flow. But when the wind shifts, sometimes seasonally, sometimes unpredictably, those horns turn. Travelers who didn't notice could wander off course for days, walking in elegant but deadly spirals. Historians still argue whether such fatal detours birthed the legends of mirages, those shimmering false oases said to lure the desperate. Science blames light refraction. The human heart blames hope. You sit for a moment, watching the horizon shimmer. Heat rises in invisible ribbons, warping the air so that distant dunes look like floating islands. It's easy to see how someone could believe the desert itself is breathing. And maybe it is. Wind doesn't just sculpt the dunes, it animates them. Modern time-lapse cameras show that entire dune fields migrate, moving several meters each year. That means the landscape is alive, slowly walking like a continent-sized creature made of dust. Nomads noticed this long before satellites did. They even gave certain dunes names as if they were old companions. The Camel's Hump, the Sleeping Woman, the dune that follows. Some families swore they could recognize their dune after returning seasons later, as if it had patiently waited for them. You smile at the tenderness of that. It's a kind of friendship with impermanence, a trust in something that never stands still. And maybe that's the whole point. The wind isn't just an element, it's the keeper of continuity. Civilizations crumble, rivers dry, empires vanish under silt, but the same invisible breath still moves the same ancient dust. You stand again, the wind tugging at your scarf, and you turn your face toward it, eyes half closed.
The air smells faintly of salt now. Perhaps the sea lies far to the east. It doesn't matter. What matters is the motion, the rhythm, the quiet reminder that even when the world erases your footprints, you're still part of its movement. Out here, you don't find your path. You let the path find you.
By late afternoon, the air turns strange. It carries a smell you can't quite name, sweet, heavy, almost electric. Your lips taste of dust and metal, but underneath there's something new, moisture, faint, teasing, like the memory of rain. You inhale again, deeper this time, and your pulse quickens. You're not imagining it. Somewhere far off, the wind is carrying the scent of water. For a nomad, that's the most sacred fragrance in the world. You stop walking and face the breeze. The wind brushes across your skin and brings with it 1,000 invisible clues. A drop in temperature, a rise in humidity, the tiniest pressure change that makes your ears ache slightly. You close your eyes. You don't need to see. Your nose, tongue, and lungs are enough. You can almost hear the promise hidden in the air. Nomads called this gift chasing the smell of rain. It wasn't superstition, it was chemistry. Before clouds even appear, the earth releases a compound called geosim when moisture touches dry soil. That's what gives rain its scent. The smell of life returning. And because air can carry geosim for miles, skilled wanderers could detect it long before storms arrived. To follow the wind was quite literally to follow the breath of water. Historians found accounts from Bedouin poets who described how the rain's perfume would reach them days before the first drops. Whole migrations began on that invisible cue. A single breeze could signal safety or starvation. One tribe in Mauritania had a saying, "The rain speaks softly first." That whisper, the smell of wet stone, was their trumpet call to move. You glance around and notice the herd, restless now, noses lifted toward the same scent. Camels snort, stamping at the sand. Goats bleat softly, impatient. Even the dogs seem to feel it. Every living thing is suddenly alert, charged with the same longing. The air, once dry and indifferent, now feels alive, pulsing with promise. But here's the tricky part. Not every promise keeps itself. Sometimes wind lies. There's a phenomenon modern meteorologists call phantom rain, humid air that carries the smell and coolness of a storm, but drops nothing. The moisture evaporates before it ever reaches the ground. It's cruelly common in deserts, where the heat steals every drop midair. Imagine being a traveler, following that scent for days, only to find empty sky above and cracked earth below.
Historians still argue whether entire migrations failed because people mistook this illusion for hope. Some tribes even had a word for it, the thirsty wind. You'd think they'd grow cynical, but they didn't. They adapted. They learned to test the truth of air. A sudden gust, too warm, meant deception. If the humidity held steady for more than a few hours, it was real. If lightning flickered without thunder, false hope. Over time, they built a lexicon of weather cues that rivaled any scientist's manual. And when the wind was truthful, when real rain approached, the whole world transformed. You can imagine it, dry wadi beds darkening like veins, frogs appearing from nowhere, seeds buried for years bursting into green. The scent of wet sand turns the entire desert into a cathedral. There's an ancient Arabian poem that goes, "The rain fell, and we remembered who we were." Because to wander the earth without roots is one thing, but to find water by scent alone, to anticipate it before the clouds themselves, that is belonging. You walk a little further, the air growing cooler with every step. A single drop touches your cheek, warm at first, then another, colder. Within minutes, the storm arrives. The first few drops hiss against the sand, vanishing instantly. But soon the rain thickens, the ground drinks greedily, steam rising like ghostly fingers. You tilt your head back, laughing under the downpour. It's not just relief, it's communion. You and the desert, breathing the same air, washed by the same sky. The nomads knew this moment intimately. Their tents were designed to survive it, their hearts to celebrate it. When rain came, the children danced barefoot in the mud, and the elders lifted their palms to the sky. Water meant survival, but also rhythm. The return of rain confirmed the balance of the world, that even after months of heat, the cycle still remembered them. And when the storm passed, the wind always shifted again, cooler, clearer, renewed. It would carry the scent of damp soil for miles, guiding others who were still wandering. The rain you feel now may be the same one whose perfume once told a caravan this way, life this way. You breathe deeply again. The smell lingers, sweet, loamy, ancient. You realize the air you're inhaling might hold the same molecules that brushed against their faces centuries ago. The wind doesn't die, it just keeps traveling. And as it passes over you, whispering through the fresh, wet silence, you understand why they always followed it. Because to follow the wind was to follow life itself.
After the rain, the world sounds different. Every surface sighs. The dunes,
darker now, no longer whisper, they murmur, heavy with moisture. The wind softens into a long, low hum, like a voice clearing its throat after days of silence. You sit near what used to be a dry ravine, now slick with mud, and listen. Far away, you hear something faint but unmistakable, a call. It's not human. It's a whistle, clear, deliberate, and carried perfectly by the wind. You glance toward the sound, but see no one. The echo lingers, rising, falling, answering itself. It could be a bird or something older. Among nomads, whistling on the wind was communication long before written words or radio waves. When people lived far apart across vast plains, their voices were powerless against distance. The air, however, was generous. Whistled speech traveled effortlessly, 5, sometimes 10 kilometers if the terrain was right. Entire languages existed in pitch, rhythm, and breath. Historians call it whistled language, and examples still survive today. In the Atlas Mountains of Morocco, shepherds communicate across valleys through tones that mimic spoken words. In the Canary Islands, the Silbo Gomero whistle can carry messages from ridge to ridge. To the untrained ear, it sounds like birdsong. To those who know, it's a sentence, a name, a secret. Now imagine such systems thousands of years ago, when nomads scattered across deserts, steppes, and highlands. When smoke signals were too slow and written words too far away, the wind became their messenger. You sit quietly, half smiling, picturing two camps miles apart, trading jokes and warnings through invisible song. Storm coming. Bring the goats. Your cousin owes me dates. It's almost funny. Humanity's earliest social network, powered entirely by lungs and breeze. One traveler once told a curious story about the Bedouin of Sinai. He claimed that on still nights, when the air refused to move, the elders would send messages by heating the sand and striking it with reeds, producing vibrations that traveled through the ground. If the air sleeps, then we speak to the earth instead, he said. Whether or not that's true, the sentiment fits. The wind was their preferred ally, but never their only one. Still, the wind was fastest. When it carried your words, you could feel connection across distance, a kind of invisible companionship. You were never completely alone in the desert if you could whistle into it. And it wasn't only communication of speech. Nomads used song and rhythm too. Many of their lullabies and chants were composed to travel with the air, not fight against it. They'd choose low, throaty notes that could ride the breeze for long stretches. That's why steppe throat singing, centuries later, still sounds like the wind itself speaking through human lungs. It's not imitation, it's partnership. There's a quirky legend about one Turkic bard who supposedly sang so perfectly in tune with the wind that he vanished into it mid-song. Modern scholars might roll their eyes, but it's tempting to imagine someone finally syncing so completely with nature's frequency that they simply merged. You let out a soft laugh at the thought, the first musician to literally blow away. But even humor aside, There's a quiet beauty in that image. Humans learning not to overpower the elements, but to harmonize with them. Every sound you make out here, the wind edits, softens, or carries further. The air itself becomes an instrument. The wind can also deceive, too. Just as it carries messages, it can twist them. A shift in pressure, a cross-current, and a simple whistle could warp into something unrecognizable. Historians still debate whether this gave rise to countless ghost stories of voices on the wind. You can picture it, someone alone by a dying fire, hearing a far-off call that sounds almost human. Maybe it was a message lost to distortion, or maybe it was just loneliness given sound. Either way, the idea that the wind holds memories, conversations half heard and carried endlessly forward, feels comforting. Somewhere above your head, a fragment of laughter or song might still be traveling, long after its speaker is gone. You stand now, testing your own breath. You purse your lips and let out a small, tentative whistle. It wavers at first, then steadies, caught instantly by the air. It drifts away, barely audible, but you know it's moving, out across the desert, maybe miles before it fades. It's strange how something so simple, one note, can feel like connection. For a moment, you feel the presence of those long-vanished wanderers. The same air that once carried their voices is carrying yours now. And that realization hits you like quiet thunder. The wind is a bridge, not just between places, but between times. You lower your head, smiling. Maybe somewhere the past is listening.
By the next evening, the ground beneath your feet has changed again. The sand feels finer, almost silken, and the air heavier, fragrant with faraway salt. When you close your eyes, you can hear something new beneath the wind's constant hum, a distant roar, rhythmic and deep, the sea. And just like that, you realize the wind doesn't belong to the desert alone. It has oceans to play with, too. For thousands of years, traders and travelers discovered the same truth. The wind that shaped dunes also pushed ships. The nomads of the sea, sailors of the Indian Ocean and South China Sea, learned to read its moods the same way Bedouins read dust. Monsoon winds, in particular, became their compass, their calendar, their fortune. You can almost see them now. Lateen sails swelling like lungs, hulls creaking, ropes humming with tension as men stare at the horizon, waiting for the wind to turn. Historians call this the age of wind routes, the moment when invisible patterns in the air decided the fate of empires. The monsoon wasn't just weather, it was a schedule written by the sky. It arrived predictably, twice a year, carrying ships eastward from Arabia to India, then back again months later. Trade, religion, stories, spices, all of it moved on that breath. To follow the wind was no longer only about survival, it was about connection. You imagine a merchant standing at dawn in Aden or Calicut, tossing a handful of sand into the air, just like the desert wanderers did. The direction it blew would determine not only his route, but his year's income, his children's future, maybe even his life. The wind had become economy, destiny, and prophecy all at once. But sailors like Nomads knew better than to trust it blindly. The monsoon could be generous one season and murderous the next. Too early, and it tore masts like reeds. Too late, and you drift in dead calm, your water barrels dwindling. Mariners called those still patches the doldrums, a word we now use for melancholy, which feels fitting. To be trapped where wind won't come is a sadness the land can't comprehend. You walk slowly now, letting the gusts press against you. Somewhere out there, invisible rivers of air connect continents. Even as you stand still, molecules that once swept over Africa are brushing your skin, whispering of mangroves, rainforests, and salt flats. The wind is the great migrant that never rests. There's an old Arab saying, "The wind knows the way to every shore." It wasn't metaphor, it was fact. Early sailors used wind charts that mirrored the oral maps of desert tribes. Same system, different terrain. Instead of dunes, there were waves. Instead of caravans, fleets. Instead of camels groaning, there were masts creaking. Yet the principle remained: read the air, and you'll never be lost. One of the most astonishing examples comes from the Austronesian seafarers, people who, centuries before modern navigation, crossed the Pacific, guided only by wind, stars, and wave patterns. They learned to sense subtle changes in air temperature and cloud texture to locate distant islands. Western scholars long doubted such stories, until experimental voyagers in the 20th century recreated their journeys successfully. The winds, it turns out, remember their own lanes. And it wasn't just geography these travelers carried. Every gust that filled a sail also carried something less tangible: language, faith, recipes, ideas. The Silk Road on land met its twin across the ocean, bound not by roads or rails, but by breath itself. You grin quietly, realizing the irony. The same wind that erases footprints can also spread civilization. Of course, the wind had a mischievous side too. Traders sometimes blamed it for deceit. When goods didn't arrive, captains swore, "The wind betrayed us." One Persian poet even wrote, "A fickle breeze stole my fortune and sold it to the waves." Romantic nonsense? Maybe. But if you'd ever watched a perfect breeze vanish into stillness mid-voyage, you'd understand. The air owes loyalty to no one. Historians still debate whether humanity's greatest discoveries, navigation, trade, even globalization, would have existed without predictable winds. The answer seems obvious. Without them, every ocean would have been a wall, not a road. You step forward and imagine those old sailors hearing the same thing you hear now: the low sigh of moving air, the pulse of a planet inhaling and exhaling around them. Whether on camelback or ship deck, whether wrapped in linen or salt spray, every wanderer was chasing the same invisible rhythm. And maybe that's what connects them all. The Bedouin in his tent, the sailor at his mast, the traveler like you, all guided by the same whisper that never dies, the same companion that never stops moving. You tilt your face toward the horizon and smile. It doesn't matter if you walk or sail. When you follow the wind, you're part of the oldest journey on Earth. Night returns, cooler now, gentler. The air hums with that post-rain stillness, the kind that makes every sound seem sacred. You sit beside a small, well-tended fire,
the smoke curling slowly towards the stars. And notice something subtle in the way everyone around you behaves. No one speaks loudly, no one whistles. Every gesture is careful, almost ceremonial. The reason, you realize, is respect. Out here, the wind isn't just weather, it's law. To settled people, wind might be a nuisance, a thing that slams doors, tangles hair, blows dust into tea. But to nomads, it's something entirely different. It's presence, its will. And to live under its rule, you have to obey its quiet commandments. Across every wind-swept culture, that reverence took form in ritual. The Mongols offered the first cup of fermented mare's milk to the east wind, believing it carried the voices of ancestors. Tuareg tribes in the Sahara never spoke the name of a fierce dust storm aloud, fearing it might return if summoned. In Central Asia, horsemen braided ribbons of blue cloth and tied them to sacred trees, letting them flutter so that the wind could carry their prayers. You watch one such ribbon now, thin, frayed, shimmering faintly in firelight. It flutters with a rhythm that feels almost like breathing. You wonder if that was the point, to remind humans that they live inside a much larger set of lungs. Some anthropologists argue that air worship was the earliest form of religion. Before gods had faces, they had motion. The unseen power that filled your chest when you inhaled was the same one that bent trees, lifted sand, and decided whether your crops or your children would live. The line between breath and divinity was paper thin. And the nomads, always closer to the raw edge of survival, kept that memory alive longer than anyone else. They built taboos around it. Whistling at night, for example, was forbidden among many steppe peoples. It was said to mock the spirits of the air. The punishment wasn't superstition, it was survival. Loud noises in still air could echo far, revealing your camp to enemies or predators. So practicality became reverence, and reverence became culture. You smirk quietly, thinking of how modern society replaced that sacred silence with leaf blowers and traffic. Somewhere the old gods of air must be covering their ears. But beneath the humor, the wisdom remains. The wind is not just movement, it's relationship. You breathe it in, it breathes you out. Every fire, every word, every sigh participates. By the next evening, the ground beneath your feet has changed again. The sand feels finer, almost silken, and the air heavier, fragrant with faraway salt. When you close your eyes, you can hear something new beneath the wind's constant hum, a distant roar, rhythmic and deep, the sea. And just like that, you realize the wind doesn't belong to the desert alone. It has oceans to play with, too. For thousands of years, traders and travelers discovered the same truth. The wind that shaped dunes also pushed ships. The nomads of the sea, sailors of the Indian Ocean and South China Sea, learned to read its moods the same way Bedouins read dust. Monsoon winds, in particular, became their compass, their calendar, their fortune. You can almost see them now. Lateen sails swelling like lungs, hulls creaking, ropes humming with tension as men stare at the horizon, waiting for the wind to turn. Historians call this the age of wind routes, the moment when invisible patterns in the air decided the fate of empires. The monsoon wasn't just weather,
It was a schedule written by the sky. It arrived predictably, twice a year, carrying ships eastward from Arabia to India, then back again months later. Trade, religion, stories, spices, all of it moved on that breath. To follow the wind was no longer only about survival, it was about connection. You imagine a merchant standing at dawn in Aden or Calicut, tossing a handful of sand into the air, just like the desert wanderers did. The direction it blew would determine not only his route, but his year's income, his children's future, maybe even his life. The wind had become economy, destiny, and prophecy all at once. But sailors like nomads knew better than to trust it blindly. The monsoon could be generous one season and murderous the next. Too early, and it tore masts like reeds. Too late, and you drift in dead calm, your water barrels dwindling. Mariners called those still patches the doldrums, a word we now use for melancholy, which feels fitting. To be trapped where wind won't come is a sadness the land can't comprehend. You walk slowly now, letting the gusts press against you. Somewhere out there, invisible rivers of air connect continents. Even as you stand still, molecules that once swept over Africa are brushing your skin, whispering of mangroves, rainforests, and salt flats. The wind is the great migrant that never rests. There's an old Arab saying, "The wind knows the way to every shore." It wasn't metaphor, it was fact. Early sailors used wind charts that mirrored the oral maps of desert tribes. Same system, different terrain. Instead of dunes, there were waves. Instead of caravans, fleets. Instead of camels groaning, there were masts creaking. Yet the principle remained: read the air, and you'll never be lost. One of the most astonishing examples comes from the Austronesian seafarers, people who, centuries before modern navigation, crossed the Pacific, guided only by wind, stars, and wave patterns. They learned to sense subtle changes in air temperature and cloud texture to locate distant islands. Western scholars long doubted such stories, until experimental voyagers in the 20th century recreated their journeys successfully. The winds, it turns out, remember their own lanes. And it wasn't just geography these travelers carried. Every gust that filled a sail also carried something less tangible: language, faith, recipes, ideas. The Silk Road on land met its twin across the ocean, bound not by roads or rails, but by breath itself. You grin quietly, realizing the irony. The same wind that erases footprints can also spread civilization. Of course, the wind had a mischievous side too. Traders sometimes blamed it for deceit. When goods didn't arrive, captains swore, "The wind betrayed us." One Persian poet even wrote, "A fickle breeze stole my fortune and sold it to the waves." Romantic nonsense? Maybe. But if you'd ever watched a perfect breeze vanish into stillness mid-voyage, you'd understand. The air owes loyalty to no one. Historians still debate whether humanity's greatest discoveries, navigation, trade, even globalization, would have existed without predictable winds. The answer seems obvious. Without them, every ocean would have been a wall, not a road. You stepped forward and imagine those old sailors hearing the same thing you hear now. The low sigh of moving air, the pulse of a planet inhaling and exhaling around them. Whether on camelback or ship deck, whether wrapped in linen or salt spray, every wanderer was chasing the same invisible rhythm. And maybe that's what connects them all. The Bedouin in his tent, the sailor at his mast, the traveler like you, all guided by the same whisper that never dies, the same companion that never stops moving. You tilt your face toward the horizon and smile. It doesn't matter if you walk or sail. When you follow the wind, you're part of the oldest journey on Earth. Night returns, cooler now, gentler. The air hums with that post-rain stillness, the kind that makes every sound seem sacred. You sit beside a small, well-tended fire, the smoke curling slowly towards the stars, and notice something subtle in the way everyone around you behaves. No one speaks loudly, no one whistles. Every gesture is careful, almost ceremonial. The reason, you realize, is respect. Out here, the wind isn't just weather, it's law. To settled people, wind might be a nuisance, a thing that slams doors, tangles hair, blows dust into tea. But to nomads, it's something entirely different. It's presence, it's will. And to live under its rule, you have to obey its quiet commandments. Across every wind-swept culture, that reverence took form in ritual. The Mongols offered the first cup of fermented mare's milk to the east wind, believing it carried the voices of ancestors. Tuareg tribes in the Sahara never spoke the name of a fierce dust storm aloud, fearing it might return if summoned. In Central Asia, horsemen braided ribbons of blue cloth and tied them to sacred trees, letting them flutter so that the wind could carry their prayers. You watch one such ribbon now, thin, frayed, shimmering faintly in firelight. It flutters with a rhythm that feels almost like breathing. You wonder if that was the point, to remind humans that they live inside a much larger set of lungs. Some anthropologists argue that air worship was the earliest form of religion. Before gods had faces, they had motion. The unseen power that filled your chest when you inhaled was the same one that bent trees, lifted sand, and decided whether your crops or your children would live. The line between breath and divinity was paper thin. And the nomads, always closer to the raw edge of survival, kept that memory alive longer than anyone else. They built taboos around it. Whistling at night, for example, was forbidden among many steppe peoples. It was said to mock the spirits of the air. The punishment wasn't superstition, it was survival. Loud noises in still air could echo far, revealing your camp to enemies or predators. So practicality became reverence, and reverence became culture. You smirk quietly, thinking of how modern society replaced that sacred silence with leaf blowers and traffic. Somewhere the old gods of air must be covering their ears. But beneath the humor, the wisdom remains. The wind is not just movement, it's relationship. You breathe it in, it breathes you out. Every fire, every word, every sigh participates.
You smirk quietly, thinking of how modern society replaced that sacred silence with leaf blowers and traffic. Somewhere the old gods of air must be covering their ears. But beneath the humor, the wisdom remains. The wind is not just movement, it's relationship. You breathe it in, it breathes you out. Every fire, every word, every sigh participates in the same cycle. Ancient shamans believed that when people died, their last breath joined the eternal wind. It's a strangely comforting thought that everyone who ever lived is still here, drifting invisibly through the air you inhale. No wonder the nomads treated it with ceremony. They didn't just follow the wind, they lived inside it. Their prayers were literally carried by it, the sound waves stretching across miles until absorbed by silence. One old Turkic legend tells of a people who could ride the wind through chanting alone. They said their words, when spoken in harmony, became light enough to travel farther than any horse. Historians debate whether that's metaphor or memory of throat singing's extraordinary reach. But either way, it captures the same truth. The voice is just air shaped by intent. And intent was everything. Even tents were pitched according to the wind's spiritual rules. In the Mongolian gur, the door always faced south, away from the harsh northern gusts toward warmth and luck. The inner altar, meanwhile, sat opposite the entrance, positioned so that prayers would leave the tent carried by favorable currents. If the wind turned mid-ritual, it wasn't just meteorology, it was omen. Every movement of air was a kind of moral compass too. One Arabic proverb warns, "When the wind shifts, so should your heart," meaning adapt or perish. The nomads took that literally and spiritually. Refusing to move when the world demanded it was the ultimate sin against the breath of existence. You lean back and exhale slowly. Your own breath drifts upward, merging with the smoke, then vanishing into the night. Somewhere above, that ribbon tied to the sacred pole dances harder, as if responding to you. It's silly, you think, but also not. You're breathing in the same molecules exhaled by ancient storytellers, animals, volcanoes, forests, and stars. The planet itself is a closed loop of air. The same wind that once brushed a camel's ear in the Gobi could now be whispering against your skin. And suddenly that realization feels deeply intimate. No empire ever ruled the wind. No monument ever outlasted it. It's the one element that refuses ownership, the one law that ignores borders. You smile softly, eyes half closed. If you've been following this long, you start to understand. The wind is both the rule book and the rebellion. It dictates how you live, yet frees you from all other masters. You look at the horizon one more time, the fire smoke curling upward, ribbons fluttering quietly, the air cool and full of memory. Out here, law doesn't come from men, it comes from motion. And tonight, motion feels eternal.
Morning comes dressed in gold. The camp stirs again, quiet but deliberate. Canvas sighing, hooves shifting, laughter muffled by wool. The first thing you notice is color. Flashes of red, blue, and white catching the light as the wind rolls through the tents. Fabric everywhere, billowing, rippling, whispering like the wings of 1,000 birds. You realize that the wind doesn't just guide the nomads, it speaks through what they wear. Across centuries, their designs were more than aesthetic. Every fold, stitch, and seam was a conversation with the air. The world's oldest engineers, after all, were tailors with survival on the line. Take the Bedouins' robes, loose, layered, open at the sides. Not for modesty, though that came later, but for airflow. The wind passes under and through the fabric, cooling the body in the same way a tent cools the desert air. Silk was often preferred to cotton, not because it looked finer, but because sand slides off it and it doesn't trap heat. It's like wearing cooperation with the climate. Or look at the Mongolian deal, a long cross-wrapped coat cinched by a sash. It's airtight when buttoned against winter winds, but easily loosened for the summer breeze. Nomads wore theirs as insulation, armor, and compass all at once, the overlap of the flap even indicating direction during travel. Everything moved in harmony with the air. You reach out and run your fingers along a tent rope. It thrums faintly like a stringed instrument, vibrating in rhythm with the gusts. Even the shelters seem alive. Goat hair tents, like those used by Tuaregs or Bedouins, are masterpieces of material science. When dry, the fibers contract, keeping out sand and dust. When wet, they expand, allowing ventilation and drying within hours. They literally breathe, inhale and exhale with the weather. Historians still marvel at this design, and some architects quietly borrow from it. NASA engineers once studied Bedouin textiles for inspiration on flexible, self-cooling materials. Imagine that, ancient desert craft influencing spacesuits. Proof that cooperation with wind never goes out of style. The Nomads even wove sound into their designs. Loose tassels on tents weren't just decorative. They produced a faint clicking in the breeze, a kind of acoustic alarm system. If the tone changed, it meant the wind had shifted or strengthened, a signal to secure camp or prepare to move. The tent literally told them what was coming. You grin at the thought, wearable weather forecasts long before smartphones existed. There's humor, too, in how the wind became a kind of fashion critic. Among desert tribes, a poorly secured veil could earn ridicule because if the air kept tugging at your scarf, it meant you'd failed to greet it properly. In parts of Arabia, women learned to wrap their malhafa so skillfully that even a sandstorm couldn't undo it. Grace under pressure, literally. And color wasn't random either. White or light tones reflected sunlight, of course, but darker shades, deep indigo, rust, ochre, absorbed heat during cold desert nights. Some Tuareg veils are still dyed with natural indigo that rubs faintly onto their skin, turning it blue. To outsiders, it looks exotic. To them, it's armor. Indigo repels insects and reflects infrared light. The desert wind, once harsh and impartial, becomes gentler when you dress in its favorite hues. Every piece of fabric, every line of stitching, every flowing silhouette was tuned to the invisible. If you lived by the wind, you let it touch everything you owned. Historians sometimes miss how intimate this relationship was. Clothes weren't protection from nature, they were partnership with it. Nomads didn't hide from the air, they invited it in, asked it to cool their skin, dry their sweat, shape their day. Theirs was a culture built not on resisting the elements, but collaborating with them. You sit back and close your eyes. The breeze brushes your face, then your hair, then the cloth around your shoulders. It moves through you like conversation. You can almost feel it saying, "This is how we've always done it, together." And maybe that's why nomadic clothing and architecture survived unchanged for centuries. You don't redesign perfection, you live inside it. You imagine what modern cities would look like if they learned that same lesson. Buildings that breathe, streets that hum with wind instead of choking it. Somewhere, deep inside, the old wisdom waits. Don't trap air, trust it. The wind catches the corner of your cloak now, flipping it lightly against your leg. It's not annoyance, it's choreography. You laugh quietly and let it have its way. The breeze moves on, satisfied, tugging at the tents like an old friend. For a moment, you feel perfectly balanced, cloth, skin, and air in easy conversation. No resistance, no noise, no command, just coexistence. And that's when it dawns on you. Even fabric remembers how to follow the wind.
The peace doesn't last long. By mid-afternoon, the sky begins to bruise. Clouds roll in, not gentle and silver like before, but thick and brown, their bellies dragging the horizon. You taste metal again on your tongue, sharper this time. The animals grow restless. Goats press close to the ground. Camels fold their legs and groan, and every tent rope begins to hum like a warning. The wind, your old companion, is changing its tone. You pull your scarf tighter around your face. In seconds, the air transforms from familiar whisper to living creature, rising, whirling, breathing harder with each gust. The temperature drops as the world turns sepia. A wall of sand begins to rise at the edge of sight, tall as a mountain, crawling closer with impossible speed. A sandstorm. Every nomad fears it, and yet, paradoxically, many have been saved by it too. Storms that save lives, they used to say, because in the desert, even chaos can be kind. The first wave hits like breath from an open furnace. The air is sand, the ground is sand, your skin becomes sand. It's blinding, deafening, and yet somehow, astonishingly, organized. The storm moves with purpose, sculpting the world as it devours it. Nomads don't panic, they prepare. Camps collapse instantly. Animals huddle behind dunes. People wrap themselves in cloth, trusting the ancient rituals that have saved their ancestors 1,000 times before. Inside the darkness, the world shrinks to sound. The hiss of grit against fabric, the steady heartbeat of the wind, the occasional metallic ping of something striking your kettle. It feels endless. But here's the strange thing. Within that chaos, the air tells stories. Nomads claim they can hear direction inside a storm. The way the grains rattle give away where the heart of it lies. If the hiss is high and sharp, the wind is running flat. If low and heavy, it's climbing a dune. Some say the storm even sings, a deep bass note like a bow drawn across a string. Scientists have verified this. When sand grains collide, they vibrate together, producing an eerie harmonic called booming dunes. So yes, the storm does have a voice. You can almost hear it now, even as you crouch low, wrapped tight, breathing shallow through the fabric. The sound is hauntingly beautiful.
a chorus of millions of grains moving in perfect rhythm, rewriting the landscape as it goes. Somewhere in the swirl, an old memory surfaces. A Bedouin tale about a traveler lost for days on the brink of death, who followed the roar of a storm, believing it would kill him quickly. Instead, it led him to an oasis. The wind had carved a channel deep enough to reveal underground water. Death, it turned out, had cleared the path to life. That's the thing about the desert. It doesn't deal in mercy or cruelty, only balance. Historians still debate how ancient caravans survived storms of this magnitude. Some evidence suggests traders used the wind itself as protection, moving just behind the edge of the tempest where the air cleared but the sand still hid their silhouettes from raiders. They called it riding the breath. To outsiders, it sounds reckless. To them, it was camouflage. The storm became both predator and shield. When the wind finally begins to ease, the silence is surreal. You emerge from your wrap, coughing softly, eyes squinting. The world looks reborn. Dunes are in new places, the horizon redrawn. What was once uphill is now valley, and where the camp stood, a smooth plain gleams like powdered gold. Every storm is a reset button. Nomads understood this better than anyone. They didn't curse the wind for destroying what they built. They thanked it for renewing what it touched. Sandstorms erased borders, buried ruins, humbled the arrogant. To live by the wind is to accept constant rebirth. You start rebuilding camp in silence. The act feels almost sacred. Unfolding canvas, resetting stones, tying knots that have been tied 1,000 times before. Each gesture carries memory. Someone hands you a skin of water, still warm from being buried during the storm. You drink slowly, the liquid gritty but alive. As you look around, you realize that nothing has truly been lost. The fire can be rekindled, the tents can be reassembled, the paths can be relearned. The wind may erase, but it never empties. It leaves behind the opportunity to begin again. Maybe that's why nomads never feared storms. They called them the world's breath. The desert inhaled, they waited. It exhaled, they continued. You sit in the afterglow of quiet, watching thin columns of sand drift lazily like smoke. The sky above glows lavender now, almost kind, as if apologizing for its tantrum. You breathe deeply, filling your lungs with air still scented with dust and ozone. It's rough, imperfect, and real, like the world itself. For a moment, you think of how strange it is that destruction can feel so clean. The wind brushes your cheek once more, this time tender, playful, almost as if to say, "See, I never meant to hurt you. I was only changing things that needed changing." And somehow you believe it.
When morning returns, it's cold, biting cold. The heat that once scorched your skin feels like a dream from another world. The sand, hardened overnight, crunches beneath your boots like thin ice. You exhale and see your own breath rise, a ghost of warmth in the chill.
And in that soft mist, you realize the desert has vanished. You're standing somewhere entirely different now, under a pale sun, surrounded by white plains of snow stretching farther than sight. The wind sounds the same, but its touch is new. It no longer burns, it stings. You have crossed, at least in imagination, into another world of wanderers, the nomads of the ice. They too follow the wind, only this one howls instead of hums. The Arctic and Antarctic nomads, Inuit, Sami, Nenets, Chukchi, live in partnership with frozen air just as desert tribes live with dust. Their dunes are snowdrifts, their sandstorms blizzards. The same invisible law applies. If you can read the wind, you live. If you can't, you vanish. You pull your furs closer and picture them. Silhouettes against the aurora, sled dogs panting, snowflakes swirling like ash in moonlight. The wind here never stops moving, sculpting the tundra into waves and ridges called sastrugi. Like desert dunes, they point the way. A long, gradual slope means the wind comes from behind you. A steep, jagged edge warns of the direction it came from. The principle is identical, only the temperature has changed. Scientists who once lived among Arctic herders noticed how effortlessly they read those icy formations. They could stand in whiteout conditions, no landmarks, no sun, and still know which way to go. The snow speaks, one Nenet's elder said. You only need to listen to the sharp side. It's not metaphor. It's navigation poetry disguised as survival. And like their desert cousins, these wanderers let the wind write their architecture. An igloo isn't random art. It's aerodynamics. Built with its opening away from the prevailing wind, its dome shape redirects air upward, preventing collapse. The same physics that lets Bedouin tents breathe helps igloos endure storms. Both are lessons in surrender, structures that yield to pressure instead of resisting it. You chuckle softly. Hot wind, cold wind. It's all the same teacher, in a different mood. Even clothing tells the same story. The fur-lined parkas of the Arctic nomads mimic the double-layer logic of desert robes. Insulation outside, breathable space inside. The Sami wrap reindeer hides with the fur facing inward for warmth and the skin outward to deflect snow, creating a microclimate of perfect airflow. It's the same genius you saw in goat-haired tents, just rewritten in snow. And of course, the animals still know best. The reindeer's nose, shaped like a trumpet, warms frigid air before it hits the lungs, a natural filter humans envy. When reindeer shift suddenly, facing the wind, herders follow without question. They know the storm's language better than any map. Historians often describe nomads as primitive or rootless, but you can't help but laughing quietly at that. To follow the wind in the Arctic means knowing more about pressure systems, humidity gradients, and microclimates than most meteorologists could dream of. Every instinct is calibrated by generations of apprenticeship under the same invisible tutor. Even sound behaves differently here. In the cold, air carries noise farther and sharper. A dog's bark can travel for miles, and the crunch of footsteps echoes long after. Some Inuits say the wind remembers your voice. When someone dies, they whisper farewells into the breeze, believing the air will carry their words across the frozen plain. It's the same belief you heard under desert stars, that breath and spirit are one. You look up. The sky is alive with green light, aurora curtains swaying like silk. It's mesmerizing, and yet beneath it, the wind never rests. It prowls, it sings, it sculpts. You realize you're hearing the same song humanity has always heard, only in a different key. The scholar in you might note that physics doesn't change with geography. The poet in you can't help but thinking the wind changes personality. Here, it's harsher, but clearer. Less forgiving, more honest. The Arctic wind tells you exactly who's in charge. And yet, those who live within it don't resent it. They honor it. They feed it smoke from burning seal oil as offering, whisper thanks when it calms, and accept its scolding when it rages. The desert wind erases. The Arctic wind carves. Both insist on humility. You inhale sharply, and the cold rush burns your lungs. It hurts, but it also awakens something ancient inside you. Maybe this is what those frozen wanderers feel every day, a kind of communion through discomfort, a reminder that being alive means being part of motion. The wind gusts harder now, whipping snow into a blur, erasing the horizon again. You pull your hood tight, your breath clouding around you. And as your vision narrows to white and your heartbeat sinks with the roar, you realize that even here, even in the world's coldest silence, you are not alone. Because wherever humans have gone, through sand, sea, or snow, the same invisible companion has gone with them. The wind has always been there first, waiting, whispering, this way. When the wind warms again, the snow fades from your imagination, and you find yourself back in motion, this time surrounded by endless grass, the steppe. Waves of green and gold rolling beneath an open sky so vast it could swallow your thoughts. The air tastes different here, light, fresh, carrying the scent of sage, soil, and horses. You can almost hear hooves before you see them. This is the land of the grassland drifters, nomads of the steppe, who live not by compass or star, but by the breath of the world itself. You stand on a ridge as the horizon shimmers, alive with motion. Riders appear in the distance, small dark specks moving in effortless rhythm with the wind. They're not fighting it, they're riding it, literally and spiritually. The air flows with their gallop, filling banners and braids, rippling across the endless sea of grass. It's hypnotic. The steppe nomads learned to map the invisible. To them, the earth had no fixed roads, but the sky had lanes. Historians call them wind corridors, predictable routes of steady airflow stretching hundreds of kilometers across Central Asia. Each season, the wind changed, guiding migrations like a cosmic highway system. Modern meteorologists later confirmed this uncanny awareness. They found that many of the Mongol Empire's key supply lines aligned precisely with regions of consistent prevailing winds, not by accident, but by choice. The riders chose their paths according to how air flowed. They knew that wind meant grass growth, predictable weather, and smoother rides. When you live on horseback, following the wind isn't philosophy, it's logistics.
You picture the scene. A nomadic scout stands on a hill, wetting his finger, feeling for direction. Behind him, Herds stretch for miles. He closes his eyes and listens. The rustle of grass, the faint whistle in his ear, the subtle sway of the air against his cheek. To outsiders, it looks like guessing. To him, it's reading a living map. And when the wind turns cool from the north, he smiles. Time to move south. The grass there will be soft by the time they arrive. The air has already gone ahead to prepare it. There's a legend among the Mongols that the wind itself carried the empire's expansion. Genghis Khan's generals supposedly claimed the spirit of Tengri, the eternal sky, filled their sails and drove their horses. Even modern historians admit that favorable wind conditions during certain campaigns allowed vast distances to be crossed faster than logistics should have allowed. Coincidence or cosmic collaboration? Historians still argue. But the truth feels simpler. When you align with nature's rhythm, you move further with less effort. You kneel, grab a handful of grass, and let it go. The blades twist upward, flutter, and drift east. You can tell by their angle that the afternoon breeze is carrying warmth, meaning the land ahead has not yet cooled from morning sun. It's small knowledge, maybe, but it's enough to keep you alive. The steppe people built an entire culture around such details. Their songs praise not the destination, but the movement, the breath roads that connect one grazing ground to another. Even their language reflects this intimacy. The Mongolian word salki means both wind and luck. To have good wind meant to have good fortune. There's humor in that practicality, too. One folktale tells of a young herder who tried to boast, saying, "I go where I want." His grandmother laughed and replied, "Then you'll go nowhere. The wind doesn't care what you want." You smile, knowing she was right. To live in a place where the horizon never ends, humility is the only compass. It's said that steppe nomads could tell time by the feel of the breeze, its texture, temperature, and rhythm. The body became clock, barometer, and calendar all at once. And when storms rolled across the grasslands, they didn't run. They faced the wind. Horses were trained to lower their heads and turn into it, standing still until it passed. The humans did the same. There's a deep lesson in that kind of endurance. Sometimes the only way through chaos is to meet it head-on. You think of how the Mongols use that same philosophy in battle. Their cavalry rode with the wind at their backs whenever possible, using it to carry arrows farther, to throw dust in the enemy's eyes, even to fan the fire of burning grass behind them. The air itself fought alongside them. Some chroniclers called it divine favor. Others called it meteorological luck. Maybe it was both. As evening falls, the steppe begins to glow. The wind slows, brushing the grass into long, soft ripples that stretch to infinity. You breathe deeply, filling your lungs with cool air that smells of distant rain and wildflowers. It's easy to see why the nomads called this the breathing world. You close your eyes and feel it, the endless exhale of the land, the slow inhale of the sky. Somewhere an eagle rides an invisible current, floating without effort. A child's laugh drifts from a nearby camp, vanishing into the breeze. everything, bird, beast, human, and horizon, moves in the same tempo. The wind doesn't just connect places, it synchronizes souls. You exhale and whisper to the air, not to command it, but to thank it. And though it offers no words in reply, it curls around you, soft, approving, alive. Here on the steppe, you finally understand what the desert, the sea, and the ice have all been trying to teach. To follow the wind isn't about chasing freedom. It's about recognizing that you were part of it all along. The fire crackles low, barely taller than your hand. Around you, the steppe is velvet black, stitched with starlight. There's no sound of engines, no distant cities, just the whisper of wind over grass, and somewhere beyond, a voice, a human voice, singing.
It's not like anything you've heard before. The notes are deep, resonant, almost two at once, one low and growling, the other high and floating above it. You turn your head and the melody seems to come from every direction. The air itself hums. That's when you realize this isn't just singing. It's the wind singing through a human throat. Steppe nomads have done this for centuries. They call it throat singing, or humeyi in Mongolian. It's both music and conversation, a way to commune with the world's breath. The technique bends sound until it vibrates like the wind through a canyon. One voice becomes two, sometimes three, imitating the movement of air, the gallop of horses, the cry of eagles. You close your eyes and listen. The song isn't loud, but it fills everything. The low drone mimics the steady rumble of earth, while the high overtone flutters like air chasing its own echo. It's hypnotic, half prayer, half physics. Historians say throat singing likely began as imitation. Herders alone on the plain, copying the sounds they heard every day. Over time, it became ritual, a kind of weather charm. Sing in harmony with the wind, and it will treat you kindly. And maybe, just maybe, it's true. Anecdotes abound of storms easing after songs, of herds calming at the sound of a familiar melody. Modern scientists have tried to measure the frequencies produced by throat singing and discovered something strange. Those vibrations can influence the movement of air and dust in confined spaces. The voice literally reshapes the environment. You can't help but smile. Humans making weather with nothing but breath. The singer's tone shifts now, rising and falling like the landscape. The melody loops and repeats, long and slow, building in spirals. You feel it in your chest before your ears, a resonance that merges with your heartbeat. The song moves through you, not around you. And you realize this is what it means to belong to a place, to let your body become its echo. Nomads across the world understood that music wasn't separate from nature. It was collaboration. The desert had its drum, the thump of camel hooves. The tundra had its flute, the whistling snow. The steppe had this, voices tuned to the frequency of wind. There's even a legend about how the first throat singer was born. It tells of a shepherd who wandered for weeks, searching for his lost animals. He grew lonely,
so he began to hum to keep himself company. One evening, a powerful gust of wind rolled down the mountain and joined his song, splitting his single voice into many. The shepherd wept with joy, thinking the sky itself had taught him to sing. When he returned to his village, he tried to teach others, but no one could replicate it, until a child born during a thunderstorm managed it effortlessly. The elders said the wind had chosen its new apprentice. You chuckle quietly. It sounds mythical, but something about it feels true. Maybe the wind does choose its own musicians. In modern times, throat singers still perform for tourists and competitions, but the old purpose lingers. The melodies often carry coded messages about weather, grazing, or direction. When you hear this note, one singer once explained, you'll know the snow is coming. That's not metaphor. It's the same forecasting instinct that has guided their people for millennia. And beyond practicality, it's therapy. When you sing with the wind, you slow your breathing, match your body's rhythm to nature's. The result is meditative, almost trance-like. You suspect ancient herders didn't just entertain themselves, they self-healed. The song reaches its peak now, rising into a shimmering overtone that seems to dissolve into the stars. For a moment, the line between music and atmosphere disappears. You can't tell whether the air is vibrating from sound or memory. The grass itself trembles. Then silence, a perfect pause. And into that pause, the wind exhales again, soft and low, answering the human song like an old friend. You feel something loosened inside you. Maybe it's awe. Maybe it's longing, or maybe it's recognition, the sense that you too have been humming unconsciously all your life, trying to keep pace with something vast and invisible. The fire flickers lower. The wind shifts again, colder now, carrying the echo of the last note across the plain until it fades. You imagine it traveling miles, bending over hills, brushing herds, slipping into valleys, perhaps reaching another camp where someone lifts their head and hums in reply. A conversation older than words. That's the secret, you think. Nomads didn't just follow the wind, they sang with it, made themselves part of its endless song, so that even when alone in the vastness, they were never truly solitary. You lie back, staring at the stars as the grass rustles in harmony with your breath. Somewhere out there, the air still carries that melody, circling the globe, reminding anyone who listens the world's first music was the sound of wind and wonder.
The following day arrives soft and weightless. You wake to a wind that feels ancient, not violent or impatient, but regal, like an old storyteller pausing between tales. It brushes your cheek, curls around your wrist, and drifts on, as if inspecting the camp. Everyone moves quietly, respectfully. You can sense it. Today, the wind is sacred. In nearly every corner of the world, there came a point when people stopped calling the wind a thing and began calling it a who. The Greeks had Aeolus, keeper of the four directional winds, Boreas, the north, Zephyrus, the west, Notus, the south, Eurus, the east. The Egyptians spoke of Shu, the god who held apart earth and sky so that the world could breathe. The Chinese told of Feng Popo, the wind goddess who rode on a tiger carrying a sack full of storms. And across the steppes, the Turkic and Mongol peoples worshipped Tangri, the eternal sky god, whose invisible hand moved all winds as signs of favor or fury. To follow the wind was to follow the will of heaven itself. You picture a nomadic shaman standing at the edge of a camp, hair whipping like black thread in the gusts. Around him, feathers, bones, and bits of cloth sway from a wooden frame. He lifts his arms, not to command the air, but to greet it. Every movement he makes is rhythmic, deliberate, like a dance the wind already knows. When he speaks, his voice merges with the gusts, the syllables carried and scattered like seeds. It's easy to dismiss these rituals as superstition, but you've seen too much of the wind to call it simple. Invisible, everywhere, and stronger than empires, it makes sense that humanity would see divinity in it. Even linguistics remembers that reverence. The Latin spiritus means both breath and soul. The Hebrew ruach, same. The Greek pneuma, same again. Across tongues and centuries, to breathe has always meant to live, and to live has always meant to be moved by something unseen. Nomads understood that better than anyone. In their cosmology, the wind wasn't merely a messenger, it was the message. When it blew from the east, it carried youth, fertility, beginnings. From the west came endings, memory, ancestors. From the north, strength and warning. From the south, laughter and ease. Every direction had a mood, a lesson, a song. They treated it accordingly. Before major journeys, shamans offered wind prayers, small bundles of herbs or hair tossed into the air, gifts to ensure safe passage. When babies were born, women would take the first swaddling cloth and hang it outside the tent to catch the newborn's first breeze, believing that the wind's personality would shape the child's fate. Some even whispered wishes directly into the gusts, trusting that the air would deliver them to the gods. Historians still debate whether this wind worship was distinct or merely part of broader sky cults. But does it matter? The sky is just the wind with space to stretch its arms. You think of how those beliefs survived, quietly disguised inside new religions. Even today, churches, temples, and mosques all rely on air to sanctify, bells ringing through wind, incense rising with it, hymns carried by it. Every prayer still travels the same route as those ancient chants, upward, outward, invisible. And in some parts of the steppe, the old offerings remain. You might pass a lonely ovo, a cairn of stones or wood adorned with blue silk scarves. Travelers stop there, circle it 3 times clockwise, and add a pebble, murmuring to the wind. The gesture is simple, almost shy, but it means everything. Acknowledgement that you are guest, not master, in this moving world. You run your fingers through your own hair, now tangled and dust-scented, and feel the breeze weave through it like a living thread. It's humbling. Maybe this is what all those deities really represented, not power or punishment, but participation, a reminder that every inhale is communion with the divine. There's a small joke among old shamans. If you want to speak to the gods, whisper, the wind will translate. You grin, imagining a modern meteorologist saying the same thing with a straight face. But even science can't escape awe. The equations that describe atmospheric motion, the Navier-Stokes equations, are so complex that no one has solved them completely. Even with satellites and supercomputers, the wind keeps secrets. Maybe that's just its way of staying godlike. You exhale slowly, watching your breath disappear into the endless air. It merges instantly, indistinguishable from all that's come before. And you realize every whisper, every prayer, every sigh ever released by humanity is still out there, diffused but present. Somewhere in this endless current, the songs of the desert, the chants of the ice, the hymns of the sea, all swirl together, mingling endlessly. It's beautiful, a kind of invisible choir that never stops. You listen to the quiet gust around your tent, soft, circling, playful. Maybe it's Aeolus, maybe Tengri, maybe just air, but as it brushes your face, cool and kind, you can't help but whisper, "Thank you." And the wind, in its timeless way, answers, not in words, but in motion. The wind has softened by the time you open your eyes again. Dawn spills quietly over the plains, and for the first time in weeks, the air feels still. It's strange, almost unsettling. You've grown too used to its company, its voice, its constant direction. Now, without it, the world seems to hold its breath. The silence is heavier than noise. You begin to understand what happens when the wind stops. History does too. Somewhere in this same stillness, long ago, kings built walls and claimed the air as their own. They declared borders where the breeze had never known one, and for the first time, people who followed the wind, nomads, became strangers in lands they once moved freely through. Empires, like fences, are the wind's natural enemy. You imagine it, a stone fortress rising from the steppe, towers stabbing the horizon, flags snapping in a breeze that used to be borderless. Inside, rulers chart maps and collect taxes, trying to pin down what was meant to move. Outside, the nomads watch the dust settle around their hooves and realize the world is changing. Historians love to frame it as progress, civilization triumphing over chaos, but the nomads might tell it differently. They'd say it was the moment humans stopped listening to the air. Take the Mongols, for example. When their empire fell, the wind was blamed. Chroniclers wrote that the divine breath that once filled their sails had deserted them. After all, it was the same invisible current that had carried their arrows farther, their fires faster, their horses cooler on the run. And just as it had come, it left. You can almost hear the irony in that. No conqueror could command what they once rode upon. In China, the Great Wall still snakes across the horizon, built to block the very riders who lived by the wind. But even that wall couldn't hold it back. Centuries of storms have worn its stones smooth, its edges soft. The wind always wins in the long game. There's humor in that cosmic justice, isn't there? Empires wrote laws, the wind simply erased them. The Persians built qanats, underground channels, to tame air and water alike. The Romans designed villas with wind-catching courtyards, trying to domesticate the breeze. Even modern cities, with their skyscrapers and air conditioning, spend fortunes learning how to manage the same currents Bedouins once read by instinct. Humanity's greatest achievement might just be reinventing what nomads already knew. You can't conquer the wind. You can only cooperate. And yet, it's not all tragedy. Some empires tried to listen. The Ottomans, whose caravanserai dotted trade routes from Arabia to Anatolia, designed those inns with wind in mind, arched openings that funneled air through stables and sleeping halls. The wind that guided the nomads became the same breath that cooled the merchants who replaced them. Still, the heart of the story remains the same. Settled kingdoms saw movement as threat, mobility as rebellion. The wind-born people were called wild, lawless, ungovernable, because they refused to stay put. They were too loyal to freedom's first teacher. You stand now on a small rise and feel the first stirrings of morning air. It slides across your face like a familiar hand. You think of all those ancient battles, of soldiers marching against riders who vanished into gusts, of rulers trying to tax what couldn't be held, of cultures that flourished by staying still, only to wither when the climate shifted. Historians still argue whether the fall of empires was caused more by politics or weather. Droughts, storms, monsoon failures, those subtle shifts in wind patterns that turned abundance into famine. Perhaps it was the planet's subtle revenge for being ignored.
You laugh softly. If the wind could speak, maybe it would say, "You stopped following me, so I left you behind." But there's mercy in it too. The same wind that toppled kingdoms carried seeds, ideas, languages. When walls crumbled, the breeze filled the gaps with pollen and stories. Civilizations ended, but air kept moving. It always does. The nomads, in their quiet wisdom, never mourned what they couldn't keep. To them, impermanence wasn't loss. It was truth. The air owns nothing, an old Kazakh saying goes, and that is why it owns everything. You look at the horizon again, where the ruins of empires would lie if time hadn't already buried them. Sand, stone, grass, all reshaped, all forgiven. Above it, the air glitters faintly in the rising sun, still free, still traveling. You take a deep breath and smile. Kingdoms rise and fall, but the same wind that once kissed a pharaoh's cheek now brushes yours. Maybe the lesson isn't about power at all. Maybe it's about endurance, the quiet kind that doesn't demand monuments. Because the wind in the end is both witness and historian. It remembers everything and stays loyal to no one. And the nomads, they were the ones who listened best. The world around you brightens into something strangely modern. Engines humming in the distance, the faint tang of fuel, a cross trail tracing white lines across the sky. The wind is still here, but it sounds different now, filtered through steel and circuitry, moving people in ways its ancient followers could never have imagined. Yet when you look closer, you realize that nothing has truly changed. Humans still follow the wind, they just gave it new names. Truckers riding cross-country highways still watch the air.
They learn to read the lean of the trees, the sway of roadside grass, the way dust trails behind the rigs ahead. A crosswind can tip a loaded trailer as surely as a sandstorm once overturned a tent. Veteran drivers call that sixth sense listening to the road, but it's really listening to the wind. Sailors haven't forgotten either. Even with GPS, sonar, and engines, they still raise a wet finger to the breeze before casting off. Racing crews memorize local wind shifts down to the minute. And every captain still whispers a small prayer when the sails fill for the first time. Ask any of them what silence means, and they'll answer the same as the old Bedouin did: trouble. And high above them all, pilots chase the same invisible currents the nomads once read by smell and sound. Jet streams, those high-altitude rivers of air, save hours of fuel when caught just right. Air traffic controllers track them constantly, adjusting routes to ride the flow. When a headwind grows strong, even a modern jet bows to it, slowing in midair like a horse leaning into a storm. The old instinct survives inside every cockpit. Trust the wind or pay the price. It's almost funny how little progress we've really made. Our machines move faster, yes, but their grace still depends on something ancient and untamed. You picture a pilot glancing at crosswinds on a digital display and think of a desert wanderer squinting at the same invisible force, separated by 1,000 years but linked by breath. Historians sometimes romanticize nomads as relics, yet modern life has only multiplied them. Sailors, truckers, migratory workers, long-haul travelers, all are wind people of a new kind. The world may have paved over the steppe, but the wind still draws its paths across asphalt and sky. And even in cities where glass towers break the currents into angry eddies, people chase air. Paragliders leap from cliffs to catch thermals. Architects design breathing buildings that vent heat through controlled drafts. Bedouin tents remade in concrete. Engineers study how to harness the jet stream for renewable energy. The future, it seems, is once again learning to follow the wind. You tilt your head back and watch a jet slide soundlessly overhead. Its wake ripples across the blue, fading almost immediately. Just another temporary path carved through moving air. You smile, thinking how the Mongols would have approved. Still traveling fast, still carrying stories, still trusting the sky. Somewhere a gust stirs the dust by your boots. It snakes across the ground, looping playfully before vanishing into the distance. You can't help whispering to it. You're still at it, aren't you? You're still at it, huh? The air doesn't answer, of course, but it brushes against your cheek like recognition. It's strange to realize that the same wind once cooled a hunter's fire, filled a trader's sail, turned a mill, lifted a kite, powered a plane. Across eras, it never needed permission, it just needed someone willing to move with it. Maybe that's the quiet continuity of human history. Not kings, not wars, but breath. We are all still nomads, chasing invisible patterns that make life possible. As evening falls, the sound of traffic fades, replaced again by the soft exhale of earth cooling. You close your eyes, and for a moment the centuries collapse. You can hear it all: the camel bells, the whistled messages, the drums of hooves, the drone of engines. One endless song of motion, one ancient promise kept.
The wind hums past your ear, carrying the same simple command it's given since the beginning. Move, listen, live.
You smile into the dusk and whisper back, "All right, old friend, lead the way." By now, you can sense it before it happens. The air grows too still, too warm. The horizon wavers like a dream. Something is wrong, and even without knowing why, your stomach knots. You felt this before, in the stories, in the silences between gusts. Then the wind turns against you. It starts softly, as betrayal always does. A faint shift, a temperature drop so quick it stings. The smell of ozone, metallic, electric, sharp. You look up. The clouds are moving in two directions at once. The animals know first. A horse snorts, pulling its reins. Dogs flatten their ears. Somewhere, an old tarp snaps like a gunshot. You whisper under your breath, "Not this time." Because this is how legends of disaster begin. The times when even nomads, the most wind-wise people on earth, misread the signs. The chronicles are full of such moments. A caravan that mistook a hot sirocco for the gentle shamal, marching into heat that cooked their waterskins dry. Mongol horsemen who pursued prey across the steppe, only for a sudden cyclone to scatter them into enemy territory. Or sailors on the Arabian Sea, trusting a steady monsoon too early, caught instead by its twin, typhoon. Historians call them weather events. Nomads called them the wind's revenge. But deep down, they knew it wasn't malice. The air doesn't hate, it warns, it tests, and sometimes it teaches the hard way. The storm breaks without sound, just a wall of air faster than any gallop. Sand explodes upward, blinding. The ground seems to vanish, replaced by roar and motion. You drop, wrap your scarf tight, feel grit grinding between your teeth. It's chaos, a world made of air and pain. It lasts a long time, long enough to remember every traveler who ever vanished this way, following what they thought was guidance. The ancient Greeks had a phrase for it, animos pseidos, the lying wind. They believed trickster spirits lived in whirlwinds, leading mortals astray for sport. The idea wasn't so far-fetched. Even now, meteorologists struggle to predict microbursts, small, fierce downdrafts that form without warning, invisible until they strike. The wind lies, yes, but only because it never promised truth. When the gusts finally subside, the silence feels alien. You open your eyes to find the world rearranged again. Dunes flattened, the horizon twisted. The camp is gone, but somehow you're still here. You cough once, tasting iron, and laugh shakily. It's not a laugh of joy, more like relief wrapped in disbelief. You remember an old Kazakh proverb, "The wind deceives only the proud." You nod, humbled. You realize how thin the line is between reading nature and pretending to rule it. The nomads survived because they listened. The moment you stop listening, even for an hour, you start dying by degrees. Still, the wind is merciful. As dusk bleeds into violet, it returns softer, almost apologetic. You can feel it brushing the sand from your shoulders, smoothing the damage it caused. The betrayal fades into reconciliation. The air seems to whisper, "You misread me. I forgive you." You can't stay angry. Who could? The wind is the reason you're alive at all.
Historians still debate what caused the greatest human migrations: the Indo-Europeans, the Polynesians, the desert traders. Some say hunger or conflict, others climate change. But maybe it was this: the wind shifting one day and a few people deciding to follow. The brave ones, the curious ones, the ones who didn't hold grudges against the invisible. You stand again, steadying yourself. The air moves gently now, cool and slow. The danger has passed, but the lesson stays. Trust the wind, yes, but also respect its moods. It doesn't owe you guidance, only motion. You breathe in, tasting dust and dusk. It's bitter, grounding, alive. Somewhere in that mix of sand and scent, there's memory. The voices of those who got it wrong, the warnings they left behind, the songs they never finished. The air carries them still. You whisper into the breeze, "I hear you." The reply is faint but certain, brushing past your ear like forgiveness. Maybe that's why the wind tests those who follow it, not to break them, but to remind them that even the surest path can turn. You can't own it, can't command it. You can only accompany it for as long as it allows. And then, when it turns again, as it always does, you start walking once more. The world is quiet again. The storm is gone. The air now soft as silk. The dunes shimmer pale silver under a patient moon. You can feel the wind still moving, but gently now, like a tired companion walking beside you after a long day. You close your eyes and listen. It isn't roaring or whispering anymore. It's breathing. Slow, deep, steady. The same rhythm as yours.
And for the first time, you understand what it means to follow the wind. It was never just about direction. It was about companionship, about moving with something that never stops, yet never truly leaves. You look around the landscape and think of everything you've seen: the deserts where air writes its own maps, the oceans that rise and fall with its moods, the frozen tundras shaped by its icy hands, the endless grasslands where riders gallop in rhythm with it. Every place different, every culture unique, and yet all of them built their lives around the same invisible teacher. Historians like to say that civilization began when humans stopped wandering. But you know now that's only half true. Civilization survived because the wind never did. It kept moving, reminding the still ones that nothing in nature stays fixed. Not dunes, not clouds, not people, not time. You kneel, scoop a handful of sand, and let it spill from your palm. It dances briefly before vanishing into the night. That simple act feels like a ceremony, the last offering to an old friend. Nomads believed that when they died, their souls didn't stay tethered to the ground. They joined the wind. Every breath ever taken, they said, eventually returns to the sky. Maybe that's what you've been following all along. Not just air, but memory itself. You breathe in slowly. The air tastes faintly of salt, of dust, of rain. Every place you've been, every life that's passed before yours. In this single breath exists the laughter of a child by an oasis, the chant of a sailor at dawn, the hum of a throat singer in the dark. You're not just inhaling atmosphere, you're inhaling history. There's comfort in that thought. You're part of something endless, something older than language and larger than empires. The wind isn't yours to control, but it's yours to belong to. You look to the horizon. The dunes glow softly like ripples on a sleeping sea. Somewhere far away, another traveler is probably rising, wrapping their cloak, feeling for direction. Maybe they too lift a hand to test the air, waiting for that familiar whisper to say, "This way." And maybe the breeze brushing your face now is the same one touching theirs, because the wind never belongs to one place. It moves through everyone, connecting the first wanderer to the last listener, the living to the remembered, the deserts to the seas. You smile, feeling it curl through your hair, tug lightly at your sleeve, as if to say goodbye, or maybe just keep going. You rise, take one last look at the vast, shifting world, and start walking, not toward a destination, but alongside your oldest companion. The air moves with you, circling, guiding, forgiving, alive. And in that quiet, endless motion, you finally understand no one truly walks alone. Because the wind, soft, invisible, eternal, always finds those who are willing to listen. So now, as the story settles and the world around you slows, take one long breath. Feel it fill your lungs, cool and kind. That's the same wind that has brushed mountains, crossed oceans, and whispered through the tents of those who came before you. It's the same breath that carried firelight through the dark, the same current that lifted sails and cleared skies. You've been walking with it this whole time, tracing the same invisible paths that nomads once trusted with their lives. Let your shoulders ease. The rhythm of the air is gentler now, rocking you like a cradle. Every inhale, every exhale is another small migration, an exchange between you and the earth. The breeze outside your window, the hum of the fan, the soft stirring in the trees, they're all part of that same conversation. Imagine it traveling farther now, beyond your room, past the rooftops, over rivers and plains, until it joins the wide, quiet breath of the world. Out there, it meets the sighs of the ancients, the laughter of travelers, the whispers of loved ones who once stood exactly where you are. Everything and everyone eventually becomes part of that motion. So rest easy. You don't have to chase anything tonight. The wind already knows the way. Let it move for you, through you, around you. Let it carry your thoughts farther than dreams and bring them back lighter, softer. The journey continues, but for now, you can sleep.